Picture this, a seemingly perfect marriage, built on love and trust. But when Aaron stumbles upon an incriminating message, everything changes. His world shatters as he uncovers his wife Kara's betrayal, an affair that threatens to unravel the life he fought so hard to build. In a whirlwind of emotions, Aaron grapples with heartbreak, anger, and the desperate search for answers. Just when he thinks he's lost everything, a new love, Emma, emerges, offering a glimmer of hope. But can he really trust again? Join us as we unravel this jaw-dropping story of love, deceit, and the quest for redemption. Don't miss the twists that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about relationships. Hit that subscribe button and prepare for an emotional ride. Emma paused at the door and turned back to face me. Thanks, Erin. See you tomorrow. Sure thing. She leaned up on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek, leaving a lingering trace of her perfume as she spun around and walked out. I watched her hips sway. With each step down the hall toward the elevator, there was no denying how stunning she was. Before she disappeared, she turned and gave a small wave, and then she was gone the second the door to my condo clicked shut. The voice started up. Isn't she a little young for you? I froze, staring at the door for a moment. I wished I could see my own reflection to gauge the expression on my face, but the reaction I expected never came. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally moving on. I searched within myself for any trace of the old anger, but it was gone. Yeah, she's young Kara. As for anything else, I wouldn't know. I brushed past her without a glance and made my way toward the kitchen. A drink seemed like the right idea. I opened the fridge, scanning the contents: fruit, vegetables, chicken breast, defrosting for the dinner I suddenly didn't feel like making. Yogurt, milk, energy drinks, and a few beers. I grabbed one of the remaining bottles from the case I'd bought almost a month ago. A lot slower pace than the first year after the divorce, that's for sure. I could hear her heels clicking on the hardwood as she followed me. The sound was the opposite of my bare feet. I popped open the bottle, setting the cap neatly in the trash where it belonged. Everything in the condo had its place, neat and orderly. I wandered into the open space of my loft, where each area blended into the next: kitchen, dining room, office, bedroom, gym, and living room. The furniture was modern, sleek, but none of it matched. Two black leather chairs flanked a metal side table. A crystal lamp sitting on top. The love seat was oversized, covered in chocolate leather, facing a massive 60-inch screen. But my favorite piece was the plush tan recliner, big enough to accommodate my 6'4" frame and comfortable enough to sleep in. Nothing fit together, yet nothing seemed out of place. It was all a reflection of me, except for her not even going to offer me a drink. She said, her voice casual. I paused to really look at her for the first time. Kara had shown up uninvited, and it had been 8 long years since I last saw her. To be fair, she still looked as gorgeous as ever. That part hadn't changed. It was everything else about her that struggled with. I'm not exactly trying to make you feel welcome. You're not my guest. If you want something, help yourself. I watched as she strutted back toward the kitchen, her hips moving in a way she knew would catch my attention. She always knew how to flaunt that body of hers, especially in skirts designed to say yes, I know you're watching. I let my gaze drift from her hips down to her long-turned legs, then to the expensive heels strapped to her ankles. I wasn't proud of it, but I let my mind wander, imagining her bending over just for my enjoyment. What surprised me was the absence of the usual sting of longing or loss. There was no pain, no sadness. Instead, there was something else, maybe pride, a fleeting thought of yeah, I had that once. She returned with her favorite wine glass filled with Chardonnay. Her expression was cool, calm, concealing whatever thoughts she had. For once, I couldn't immediately read her, and that realization didn't bother me. You look good, Aaron, she said. I feel good, Kara. It felt like the game had begun, but this time I wasn't on the defensive. Aren't you going to ask why I'm here, aren't you? Curious at all. Curiosity is not the issue, it's that I don't care. I knew Kara could hide her emotions better than most, but I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Even if it was brief, it felt like a small victory. She turned her attention to the wall, a stretch of 18 feet filled with framed photographs, a timeline of my life. It was a visual reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come since she had torn my world apart. We never had the perfect marriage, but in the beginning, we didn't know failure was even an option. We were young, broke, and full of hope, thinking that love alone could carry us. Threw anything back, then giving up wasn't in.
Our vocabulary after all soulmates didn't quit on each other.
Right, that was before she left, before she shattered.
Everything I thought we were there were moments and memories.
That we built together, like the time we scoured the couch cushions for loose change just to afford.
A shared fast food meal, we even had enough left over to split a cupcake. On our first anniversary, or the Christmas we made.
Our own ornaments out of paper and crayons, hanging them on a fake tree we found in the trash behind our apartment. Kara laminated those ornaments before our second Christmas.
And at the time I loved her even more, for it's still no matter
how much you love someone, they can get under your skin.
Kara had this habit of constantly reorganizing things. She'd rearrange the utensils, the spices, or everything in the hall closet in some order that only made sense to her the minute I got used to the new setup. She'd change it again. It
wouldn't have been a big deal if she could remember where she put anything afterward. Hey, where are the scissors? Somewhere in the drawer. She'd say they're not where they were last week. Did you move them? Probably. I can't
remember. Just keep looking. They're around here somewhere. More often than not, I'd end up buying a replacement for whatever went missing because I needed it right away. It didn't
help that we were broke, so any extra spending was a problem. It was frustrating, but to be honest, I didn't dwell
on our lack of money too much, probably because of the sex. Anytime Kara was in the room, I was turned on. She was just as hungry for it
as I was. If we had even 5 minutes alone, chances were we were getting naked. I
love the sound of desperation in her voice whenever I tease her
by holding back, and afterward when her body
finally came down from that high, I'd watch her completely spent, her skin glowing with a thin layer of sweat. She was flawless with her gloriously tan skin and soft curves that seemed impossible to resist. Her body was young,
voluptuous, a perfect mix of everything. And then there was that look in her eyes, the one that told me long before the clothes came off
that I was definitely getting lucky. It never got old, and neither did her crystal blue eyes. The memories, those were what really mattered after the divorce. And once I'd set the beer bottle aside,
I had my first real epiphany. Those tough years when we didn't know how we'd make rent taught me that together we could survive even the worst situations. But for Kara, those years were a nightmare she never wanted to relive. I watched her as she took in the photos on the wall. Her eyes lingered a little too long on the ones of the places we used to dream about visiting together, back when our dreams were still
shared. Even if they seemed impossible, she was still the embodiment of pure
sexuality. The wine glass hung loosely in her fingers, the liquid
inside swirling with every sway of her hips when she
tilted her head to look at the top row of pictures. Her blonde hair draped over the shoulders of her silk blouse, revealing the delicate curve of her neck, a neck I'd fantasized about strangling more times than I could count. Though it true, you really did visit all those places. I did. She glanced at me, trying to gauge
what I was thinking, but there wasn't much for her to figure out.
I had no next move planned. You've changed, she said. I doubt it. I'm the same person I've always been, just a little more me and a whole lot less you. That's exactly what I mean. You never would have said something like that to me before. Life is full of things we want to say, dream about saying, but
sometimes we stay silent, and in that silence we lose ourselves or become someone we're not, just to keep pretending everything's okay. I'd spent a long time searching for that truth.
Eventually, I realized we all try to be the person
we think we should be until someone holds up a mirror and we can no longer maintain the lie. Some people handle the truth better than others.
Maybe, she said with that familiar smirk
creeping back onto her face. So what's different now? She asked.
There's nothing left for you to take. We're no longer connected, and that
means you can't hurt me anymore. She opened her
mouth to respond, but her voice faltered. I almost believed
she was moved by what I said, but I knew better not even a
little. I want you to make it stop, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't
start this, Kara, but you could end it. I don't know if that's true, and even if it well, I'm not sure I would. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Not particularly, but I have no interest in
being constantly reminded that the person I loved
more than anything turned out to be a lying, cheating witch. For
reasons I couldn't quite grasp, my words seemed to hit harder than usual. Even though I hadn't said anything new, it was subtle, but I could tell it stuck her just a little. And besides, I added, I've
gotten smarter. Never interrupt your enemy.
When they're making a mistake, Sun Tzu, she asked, raising an eyebrow. Napoleon, I corrected back. In the beginning, I was completely unprepared for the devastation that came my way. During our first clash this time, I wasn't ready either, but at least now I
wasn't standing alone months before everything crumbled. Rumors started swirling. It didn't matter where I went.
People were whispering the economy was plummeting, jobs were becoming rare commodities, and layoffs loomed on the
horizon. Every time I walked through the factory, I could feel eyes on me, people discreetly pulling me aside, asking if I
had seen the list, but the pressure was even worse.
At home, Kara was teetering on the edge of panic, asking me daily if I had heard anything new. Did I still have a job? Was I sure? What was our plan? What were we going to do? I had no plan, because I didn't think I needed one. My boss, a man I trusted, looked me in the
eye and told me not to worry, so I didn't, and it would have been fine
if he'd been the one making the final decisions, but
other people intervened. If there were warning signs, I missed them. Only later did I start piecing things together. Our
sex life had slowed down considerably, I thought. It was stress. I wasn't in the mood as often, so I assumed it was my
fault. What I didn't realize was that it wasn't just me. Then came the day I got laid off, and somehow Karen knew before I even stepped through the door. My boss
had been before telling me it was ridiculous that someone with my team's top production and best quality rating was being let go. But Kara, she wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, the layoff wasn't the only thing about to go up in flames. For weeks, Kara gave no sign that our marriage was on the rocks. If
anything, she played the part of the perfect wife flawlessly. Affectionate hugs, kisses on the cheek, keeping the
house spotless, making sure I was well fed. She was even more of a domestic goddess in those final weeks. Every time
I left the room, she made sure to tell me she loved me. It was all
part of masking her guilt. The day I got served, I was standing in line to access company-sponsored out placement services. By the time I got home, the locks were changed, my clothes were boxed up in the driveway, and a copy of the restraining order was sitting neatly on top. The severance
package that should have lasted me for months quickly became a choice between fighting for custody of my daughter or trying to survive. I chose to fight, but I was outmatched. Lawyers, psychologists, judges, they all came to the same conclusion. I was mentally abusive, unfit, unemployed, and unable to care for a child. I was worthless. They made sure to put that in writing. The final blow came when I had the bright idea that if I could just talk to my daughter Mia, she'd
want to be with me. She was 9 at the time, old enough
to tell the court that she loved her dad and wanted to see me.
So one night, I found myself standing in the bushes
outside what used to be my house, hoping for a glimpse of her. That's when I saw them together for the first time, my wife, my daughter, and the company's vice president of operations.
He was the son of the company's founder, a notorious womanizer and a terrible businessman, but his father had been
respected, and loyalty to the family ran deep. As for me, I was a nobody, a ruined nobody. He wasn't a grotesque man, but in my eyes, he might as well have been 10
years older than me, with a growing belly, a fat wallet, and the family I had lost. It was the bitterness talking, but I saw nothing
but ugliness in him that night. I took my first real drink, not my first
ever, but the first one I downed to numb the pain. That drink
stretched into a year and might have gone on indefinitely until I saw her again. I was wandering the streets, disheveled and unshaven, clothes filthy and reeking of
desperation. I was weeks away from homelessness, though my crumbling studio apartment in a PI-war building hardly qualified as a home. Kara came out of a high-end boutique, arms
weighed down with bags, rummaging through her designer purse for the keys to her luxury SUV. I scared her. I could tell by the way she
froze, trying to decide whether to shield her belongings or herself.
But there was no danger from me. I was too drunk to be a threat. It took me longer than it should have to recognize her horrified gasp and the way she covered
her mouth before speeding off in her car. Finally registered minutes later, and
soon after that I stole a beer from a convenience store. I needed it badly, but I was too dumb to grab one. With a twist of cap, the kitchen scene from my past played out in my drunken haze as I searched for a bottle opener.
Kara used to rearrange the utensils all the time, for no good reason, and I couldn't find what I needed. In frustration, I smashed the bottle and emptied half the drawers onto the floor before I finally found it. Only this wasn't her home anymore, and the bottle opener had been right where
I'd left it where it should have been. Everything was still. In its place, everything except her. The day I stopped drinking was the day I left my hometown behind. I packed everything I owned into a backpack and set off with barely $50 to my name. It wasn't difficult to quit. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was just a broken man who had tried and failed to hide in the bottom of a bottle.
Is everything some kind of inspirational quote with you now? She asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Not always, not everything
Inspires someone. Sometimes things are just reminders of where we've been. What does that even mean, Erin? She snapped. I don't know what it means to you, and honestly, I don't
care to explain what it means to me, especially to you.
That first time I left, I wandered for 18 months. I hitchhiked, walked occasionally, caught a bus, and worked whatever odd jobs I could find to keep moving. Money was always tight, but my eyes were open. I found places to camp, food to eat, and the occasional shower. It wasn't much, but it
was enough. Books became my escape. AP used bookstores were my treasure troves,
where I could pick up a stack of paperbacks for less than the cost of a movie ticket. I devoured them, losing
myself in their pages. I carried an old spiral-bound notebook with me
everywhere, writing down my thoughts, feelings, and anything I wanted to remember. It became a diary of sorts, a chronicle of pain and rediscovery. I kept up with world events through discarded newspapers,
though they were often out of date and didn't seem
to affect my life much. Mostly, I listened to people. People loved to talk, and I found I was good at listening. At one point, I splurged on a used digital camera from a pawn shop. I took pictures
of the places I'd been and the people I met. Every month or so, I'd
spend a few bucks at a chain drugstore to transfer
the photos to a CD, a way of preserving the memories of my journey. After a year and a half, I
stopped in a small dusty town somewhere in the middle of the country. I took a job in the warehouse of a fertilizer factory, spending my days hauling bags and my nights
reading and writing in a small room I rented above a garage.
Eventually, I swapped my notebook for a second-hand laptop and spent my free time at the local library uploading my
thoughts and photos to a blog. To my surprise, people started following me, strangers who left anonymous comments. I
hadn't set out to gain an audience, but
knowing others were reading my words felt good. It was therapeutic, and I
didn't feel so alone. Kara paused at the only photo I had of my old family,
a strip of snapshots from a photo booth at an amusement park. Mia had been 4 at the time, her ponytail tied with pink ribbons, her newly pierced ears adorned with tiny diamond studs. The bright flash of the camera captured us in 3 moments: surprise, silliness, and pure
laughter. I could help you reconnect with her, you know, Kara said,
breaking the silence. Oh, you're suddenly up to date on everything involving our daughter. I watched her closely, knowing she was trying to read my reaction. It had to be
unsettling for her not to have the upper hand, not to know more than I did. You should be proud, she continued. She's turned out just like you. Her words caught me off guard, and I saw something flash in her eyes, shock, maybe even regret. She glanced back at the photo as if what she saw didn't align
with her memories or what she'd been told, but she
didn't say anything more. I never thought of myself as a writer in my old life. I was a production supervisor for a manufacturing company.
I worked my way up from the bottom, earning for promotions.
Along the way, writing had never crossed my mind. But when my blog made it onto a best of web list for an online men's magazine, doors began to open. Soon after, they offered me a monthly column, which eventually became a weekly gig. The pay wasn't great, but it was something. Then 2 years later, I received an email from a publishing company. They wanted to see more of my work. They wanted to publish my book, a book I hadn't even written yet. I sent them a collection of essays, raw
and disjointed. To my surprise, they liked it enough to assign me an editor who asked me to write a chapter about how my journey began. For the first time, I shared my story in a way that felt real.
But after that, nothing happened. A few years passed,
and I assumed it wasn't good enough. Still, I kept writing my blog, and column gained traction, and the money started to improve, but I was restless, so
I left again. This time, I set off for Europe. There were no hostels for 35-year-old men, no cheap train tickets
like in my youth, but I managed to crisscross the continent on a shoestring budget.
I saw things I'd only read about
in textbooks, visited places where history had unfolded, and kept moving. From Europe, I traveled to the Middle East, then to India, and spent 3 months in Asia. I experienced real poverty, nothing like the financial struggles I had cursed.
Before, the people I met were the same everywhere, always eager to talk. Always with a story to tell. 14 months into that journey, I was ready to return home when another email arrived. Attached was the preview of my book's cover. That's when everything changed. I flew back to the States to meet with agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. There was a growing buzz about my book thanks to
The popularity of my column. I used that momentum
to negotiate a pay raise from the magazine, earning more than I ever had before. It was enough to start over, so I returned to my hometown, a place I had grown to love and miss deeply, to begin the next chapter of my life.
Release of my book came and went with a
response that was nothing more than mediocre, a far cry from what some had hoped for. I wasn't really shocked by it.
My most loyal blog and column readers probably accounted
for nearly all the sales. Sadly, the lukewarm reception all but guaranteed that my career as an author was over before it had even truly begun. And then he decided to go on television. A local reporter from my hometown asked him the questions that stirred it all up. Was the story in my
book true? Had he really taken my job, stolen my wife and daughter, and spread
lies about me in court? He could have kept quiet. He should have kept quiet, but
he didn't. In most parts of the world, the story barely
made a blip, but in my hometown, the son of a prominent businessman tangled up with the ex-wife of a local author. It was the kind of gossip people couldn't resist, and out of
arrogance or embarrassment, he made things worse. He sued me
for libel and defamation. That was all the publishers needed. They had invested time and money into my book,
carefully vetting every word, pouring more resources into editing, production, and distribution. So when the lawsuit came, they seized the opportunity to recoup their losses, releasing an army
of high-pricked lawyers and PR teams on my former employer. I watched it unfold from the sidelines. This wasn't about me and him anymore. It was about the contrivers. Why? And the free publicity that came with it. His actions caused quite the stir, and suddenly my book skyrocketed up the bestseller lists. It's strange how life works. Some people just don't know when to quit while they're ahead. Did you know?
The board asked for his resignation. Kara's voice broke the silence. Nope, I
hadn't heard, I replied, not entirely surprised. Honestly, I am shocked he lasted
this long after his so-called brilliant cuts that first year.
Productivity dropped 21 and 18. The next sales were down. Morale was down. He was never any good at running things. She did defend him, which didn't surprise me. Kara wasn't the type to take a bullet for anyone. Why do I think you already knew? She asked.
Studying me because you're a cold, calculating, heartless woman, I said without a hint of hesitation. It was too bad for her, really, because I had just signed papers with Emma, and from what I understood, her husband would be needing
that paycheck more than ever. That was your lawyer?
Kara asked, clearly trying to put the pieces together. She's not my
lawyer. She's a pargle with the firm representing my publisher, I clarified. Like I said, it's not about me, but I'm
definitely going to benefit from all of this karma's a real witch. I
could see the retort forming in her mind, but it
seemed like she was starting to realize that she had nothing left to throw at me. No matter how hard she tried, I'd come out on top. As much as I was itching to use some of the onliners I'd been saving up, part of me just wanted her to leave me alone. So why are you here? I asked. That
threw her off for a moment, but she recovered quickly. Oh, now you're interested? She shot back. No, I just don't
see what you think you're going to accomplish, I said, watching her carefully. I suppose I should thank you for caring
so much about him coming here to try to salvage
the last remnants of his crumbling empire, but as I mentioned, it's
really out of my hands. I waited for her reaction. It was just as I expected. But it's not him, you, is it? I pressed. It's his money. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had the money, but now, thanks to everything that had unfolded, a good portion of it was coming to me, and Kara once again would have nothing. Don't think you can find another sugar daddy to bankroll your lifestyle, I said,
pushing a little harder. You're still a beautiful woman. You'll land on your feet, or knowing you probably your back. It
wasn't like that. She murmured, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. I couldn't help but laugh, really laugh. She couldn't
possibly believe it was any different, could she? Her body language
was telling me she did. For a brief moment I wondered if she truly didn't know the full story. Oh my God, you don't know, I said, my laughter fading into disbelief. Her expression hardened.
What the hell is that supposed to mean? I paused, running
The facts through my head, there was no risk in telling her.
After all, everything was a matter of public record by now, thanks to the months of interviews, deposition itians, and court filings. If she didn't know yet, she would find out. Soon enough, you're right, it wasn't like that at all, I said, taking a breath. I'm just talking out of turn. It was all innocent, right? Yes, she whispered barely audible. I thought about asking her to repeat it, but I decided against it. There was no point. She had already said enough.
Sure, he was just reaching out to the families of his employees, making sure everyone was aware of the situation at the plant, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. He wanted to make sure
they were all prepared for the worst-case scenario.
Naturally, he paid special attention to the mid-level
managers. We were the most vulnerable after all, and he thought his
personal attention was necessary. Kara listened intently, but her expression gave nothing away. I had no idea what was going on in her mind. So he invites you to lunch, gives you a heads up. Nothing's been decided yet, just preliminary talks, right?
Then every so often you get another call, another casual lunch. He keeps you updated on the process, feeding you
inside information about how the evaluations are coming along. I paused,
watching her for a reaction, and then his tactics changed. Suddenly, he's pouring his
art out. The stress of holding so many lives in his hands is just unbearable. He tells you about the shocking things people have offered him to save their jobs, money, sexual favors. Her eyes
widened, betraying her shock. I crossed the room
and sifted through the papers on my desk, continuing my narration. And that's when you sealed our fate. That's when he won. And I lost the moment you decided to give him your body and let your greed
destroy everything. We had your trust in me as a man, a father, a
husband, a provider was gone. I slid the documents across the table toward her.
She stared at them as if they might catch fire if she touched them. I had never seen the lists myself and had
assumed their existence was a rumor, but the attorneys at my publishing company had dug deep during discovery. The papers
in front of her weren't anything special, except for the fact that my name was at the top of the list of employees to keep.
According to the dates, it was one of the first lists they had put together, maybe even the very first. The second list was
far more revealing. The names were the same, but this one had George Daniels's messy, barely legible notes. There were
check marks by some names and a single red line through mine, annotated with just one word, Kara. Another name had the
same red mark. The lawyers couldn't believe Daniels had kept the documents, but then again, the guy was always an
idiot. The third list was printed on his own letterhead, marked final, my name.
Unsurprisingly was gone. Her eyes darted between the papers,
processing the weight of the information in front of her. I
could almost see the gears turning as she tried to make sense of it all. And now you're wondering, I said, breaking her
trance. How could I possibly know all this? Her mouth hung slightly open, and for once she was truly dumbfounded. It wasn't a good look on her.
You'll figure it out, I said coolly. You're not that
stupid. The urge to pour myself a drink was strong,
but instead I went to the kitchen. I dropped a few ice cubes into a glass and filled it with water from the fridge.
If I had learned anything, it was that giving in to urges only led to bad decisions made after careful thought ones,
where you analyze the potential consequences. Those were smarter, especially when Kara was in the room being drunk around her. Seemed like asking for trouble. I sipped the water,
then quoted Steve Martin, more to amuse myself than anything else. I believe that sex is one of the most beautiful, natural, awesome things that money can buy. The tension in the room was thick. I decided to break it. Since we're being open, I do have one question. Did you ever love me? Kara had been staring at the documents for what felt like 20 minutes.
At first, her hands shook, her grip tightening around the pages.
But soon her expression became unreadable again. She didn't respond to my question. She simply glanced up at me
for a second before looking away, avoiding the conversation entirely. I couldn't figure out why she was sitting in my loft. In the first place, there were plenty of things I wanted to ask, plenty of answers I needed, but I wasn't
ready to go there. Her sudden appearance didn't make any sense. Not even 48 hours had passed since her husband's lawyers had requested
a settlement conference. My attorney and the publishing company's legal team had practically thrown a party that night, interpreting the request as a near
admission of defeat. But in a world ruled by sharks, these lawyers
weren't the type to shy away from a fight. They were more
Like killer whales, they hunted for the thrill of it. Reveling in the destruction winning wasn't enough, they enjoyed humiliating their opponents. I was certain none of them had actually read my book. Everything I wrote stood in direct opposition to what they represented. Still, it was comforting having them around. I had once been on the opposite side of the table, armed only with righteousness, and had gotten crushed, so yes, I could be labelled a hypocrite for going along with it all now, but I hadn't started down this path. I was just riding the wave, lost in these thoughts. I glanced over at Kara. She was as stunning as ever, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought that I had been right. I used to tell her she'd only get hot daughter with age, and here she was proving me correct. But why had she gotten all dressed up for me? She looked like she was ready for a night out, or more accurately, a night on the hunt. Then it hit me, holy cow, he sent you here. I had never seen Kara so angry before. Come to think of it, I am not sure I had ever seen her angry at all throughout our marriage, even during our worst fights. She had never been truly angry. Disappointed, yes. Annoyed, absolutely, but not angry. Maybe she had been scared more often than I realized, and that's what made her betrayal so devastating. In a sea of unlikely outcomes, the thought of Kara abandoning me would have been an entire continent away. Even now, after years of soul searching and rebuilding my confidence, I knew that I'd never fully recover. Soulmates aren't supposed to give up on each other, but mine did. He must be desperate. I continued the lawsuits, the attorney fees, they've totaled $12 million. Sure, he's rich, but not that rich though. Sharks expect the judge to award almost $7 million. In judgments, they try to explain it to me once how my book had a valuation as property and how his lawsuit was frivolous, totally without merit. They built a mountain of evidence, proving that he and his lawyer knew it to it all. Sounded like a game of who could tell the better story. He wouldn't be left penniless, but he'd be close enough without that cushy job. He'd been handed on a silver platter. He'd be in deep trouble. It all made sense now. He had sent Kara to try to stop me, a last-ditch effort to save the one thing he cared about, his money. He needed his reputation, his image, and his family too. Hold on to the remnants of his empire. Kara looked up, but she still didn't say a word. I could see now that she was completely in the dark. I almost admired his ability to keep her that way. I had never been able to hide even the smallest secret from her. My guilt would have beaten me alive, but George Daniels, he had no such qualms. Some of the board members started questioning him. I continued, why didn't he have a family? When was he going to settle down? They didn't care about him or the women, but they knew a sex scandal would hurt the company. Can't have your future CEO caught up in something like that. It's bad for business. I paused, watching her reaction, or rather her lack of one. He even asked Brianna Sullivan to marry him. Not out of love, of course, but for the money. She'd been screwing him for cash, so he probably figured she'd just say yes. Brianna was notorious. Most people referred to her as a 304, and her husband Tyler was, to put it bluntly, a cuckold. I'd never witnessed anything firsthand, but the rumors were rampant. Stories of one-night stands, wild house parties, swinging, even pictures and videos online. In their case, I believe the rumors. Brianna was always the woman who wore just a little too much makeup, showed a little too much skin, and said things that had double meanings. Her husband Tyler was always bragging about how hot his wife was, practically begging other men to admit they were checking her out. For a former daytime stripper, she still had her looks, though her past might have been just another rumor. But one thing I knew for sure, Tyler Sullivan's name had been crossed off the infamous list alongside mine, with Brianna's name written next to his after his termination. Ty vanished without a trace, and Brianna, as it turned out, she wasn't as dumb as she looked. She had the gift tax records to prove it. 3 years worth. George had given her close to $150,000 for her twice-a-week treatment. Brianna had spilled everything about Daniels' scheme. She openly admitted to sleeping with him for money. We had an arrangement. She had said he was generous with his gifts, and I showed him my appreciation every Tuesday and Thursday at the condo he leased for me, my husband and I both appreciated his generosity. But once Tyler finished nursing school, I dropped that fat prick in his tiny tool. She didn't hold back and gave a very convincing explanation of why Daniels continued to fool around even after Marrying Kara, I looked right at Kara as I delivered the next line apparently.
He was looking for something he couldn't get at home like boobs, though. Shock in Kara's eyes confirmed what I suspected. She hadn't known Brianna had been telling the truth, of course, I added with more sympathy. She could have been lying after all. That doesn't sound like the woman I married, does it? But Kara's expression told me everything I needed to know. I could see it building in Kara, a slow simmer about to boil over. It had been
almost an hour since she'd spoken a word, and I knew if I was ever going to have my pound of flesh, now was the time. So,
what did he tell you when he sent you here? I asked, my voice calm but cutting. She hesitated, then muttered, he told me
to get you to stop the lawsuits by any means necessary. So does he pimp you out often, or just when he's about to lose his fortune? I fired back, watching her bristle with anger. He's not my pimp. He's my husband, she snapped. Hey, no judgment here. I know firsthand what that tight little body of yours can do to her. Man, it makes you believe things that aren't real. So when do we get
to the by any means necessary part of this show?
Because honestly, the persuasion tactics so far
have been a bit boring. What's it going to take? She whispered,
her voice so weak and defeated that for just a moment I almost felt sorry for her. That fleeting moment of pity was all I allowed. How could someone so beautiful, so full of life, allow herself to be used like this? I understood the appeal of wealth. Sure, I'd splurged on things myself, like the 100 chair I had in
the corner, but I knew I'd trade every luxury I owned just to have one more day with Kara in our crappy first apartment.
Back when things were simple, when she hadn't yet betrayed me. I guess we're just different people, I said, my voice hardening. Even if I could stop the lawsuits, I wouldn't go home to your husband, tell him I wasn't interested in his pathetic offer, then take your skanky ass back to him
and figure out how you're going to survive this rough patch.
I'm sure with a love as strong as yours you'll make it through. I watched her as I spoke, studying the face I used to want. I kissed the lips I once craved. Her silk blouse clung to her neckline, teasing just a hint of the expensive lingerie beneath. The temptation was there, but I held back. Soulmates aren't supposed to give up on each other, right? But she had.
I waited for the tears to come. Her eyes glistened, and I thought
for a second she might let them fall, but she didn't. I had to give her credit for that. Get the hell out of my house and
don't ever bring your cheating us back. After Kara left that day, I didn't think anyone could pull me out of the mess she
left behind. But that's when Emma came into my life. She wasn't anything like Kara. Where Kara brought chaos, Emma
brought a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was the simplicity of it. No strings, no
history, just two people trying to escape their own problems, if only for a while.
We'd spent hours talking, but I never planned on sleeping with her.
I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest. There were too many other things going through my mind.
But she was still beautiful, and I was still a man, and let's be honest.
She did make an offer. What does a girl have to do to
get a refill around here? She asked, breaking the tension in the room. I took her glass, filled it with her preferred wine, and returned with the bottle. I read your book twice, she said,
her words catching me off guard. I might have had a witty retort ready,
but any clever response disappeared the second I saw her blouse vanish. It must have happened while I was in the kitchen. A pang of disappointment hit me for missing the moment, but I didn't miss her next move.
As she slid her skirt of, my mind raced, wondering if all my travels and introspective self-discovery had prepared me
for this. Had it made me better at everything, including sex? I've been told I'm fairly impressive, I said,
trying to maintain some semblance of composure. I have no doubt, she replied. We made love, and afterward I collapsed onto her, spent her fingers trace patterns along my spine, pulling me out of my postcoital haze. Jesus Christ, Erin.
Your ex was an idiot, she whispered. Oh, Emma, you say the sweetest things. Emma
stayed with me every night for the next 4 months.
As the lawsuits dragged on in probate court, our time together was like
a honeymoon full of passion and lust. Despite the incredible sex, she made it clear that once the legal matters were resolved, she'd go
back to New York. I didn't hold it against her. Maybe sharks
like her, with just a few hours of law school under their belts, do
and stick around in the shallow end of the pool
for long, no matter how often they bite into your meat. Still, those months with
her were amazing. That first night she had come over
to explain the latest lawsuit, this time from my daughter, who was suing me to protect her inheritance. I had no doubt Kara was furious when she
left the knight furious for turning her down, for ruining what she thought she deserved, but in hindsight I'd gotten it wrong. Her anger wasn't directed at me, not entirely anyway. I can't begin to
Imagine what it must have been like for him in those final moments. I know how crushed I was when Kara didn't choose me.
during something as simple as a corporate downsizing, but the circumstances around George Daniels's death were far more grim. The coroner's report was inconclusive, so maybe Daniels
Never truly knew what hit him hours after she left me, and
drunk enough to barely function. Kara shot him right in the crotch. The bullet fragments severed his femoral artery, and then let's say
she couldn't bear it anymore. No one could say for certain if he lived long enough to realize she would rather end
things in the most tragic way than be with him when he no longer
had money. I can't imagine what that realization must
have felt like, but I hope he had at least a fleeting moment
to think it through afterwards. I spent days seething with anger, not for what she had done to me, but for what she had done to her daughter. As flawed as Kara was, and I still needed her. I never got the sense that they were particularly close.
Quite the opposite, really, but that didn't change
The fact that Mimia was left adrift, a lost little girl with no real guide. The one time she came to see me, she didn't even remember
the man I truly was. That hit me hard. I had thought she'd been old
enough to recall the happier days we'd shared as a family. But memories are fragile, easily replaced by lies. When you
hear them long enough. Mia didn't believe me when I told her
that once, a long time ago, we had been happy together like a real family. Now, with both her parents gone, there was no one left to confirm it. For her, one picture on my wall, surrounded by hundreds of others, couldn't and didn't change her mind. She was bitter at Kara's funeral, and I didn't blame her. She barely glanced at me, and months later I was still the villain in her eyes, with no hope of redemption.
When the final ruling came down and her inheritance evaporated in the legal maze of probate, she stormed out of the courtroom,
her angry tirade echoing through the hallways. She barely escaped a contempt charge. That was the last time I saw her. I don't hold out much hope that I'll see her again. The
bond we should have had, a father and daughter's bond, felt as broken and fragile as the one Kara and I once shared. But maybe fathers and daughters are different. Maybe one day Mia will see past the bitterness, past whatever poison M.I.S. Daniels fed her about me, and realize
she can still count on her dad. Maybe she'll find
her way in the world and eventually find someone who won't give
up on her, a soulmate, if such a thing still exists. As for me, I think I'm finally done chasing ghosts. The irony in all of this, in the end, I didn't need
revenge. I didn't need to destroy them. They destroyed themselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget
to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button for more story.